Katie Morrison loved spending time in her backyard after school. The 10-year-old girl enjoyed watching the clouds move across the sky while she played with her favorite doll. Her house sat on a quiet street in Denver, Colorado, where children could play outside without worry. Katie's mother always told her she was safe in their yard, and Katie believed her completely. On this particular Tuesday evening in March, Katie was building a small fort out of cardboard boxes her father had left behind before his deployment. Colonel Jake Morrison was serving overseas with the Marines, and he had promised Katie he would help her finish the fort when he returned home. Until then, she worked on it every day after school, adding new rooms and windows with her mother's help. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and red. Katie looked up from her work and smiled at the pretty colors. She loved how the sky looked different every evening. Sometimes it was pink, sometimes purple, and tonight it looked like someone had spilled paint across the heavens. Inside the house, Katie's grandmother, Helen Morrison, was preparing dinner. The 70-year-old woman had moved in to help take care of Katie, while her son Jake was deployed, and her daughter-in-law Lisa worked long hours at the hospital. Helen often watched Katie play through the kitchen window while she cooked, enjoying the sight of her granddaughter's innocent happiness. Dr. Lisa Morrison would not be home until late that night. The emergency room at Denver General Hospital was always busy, and Lisa had volunteered to work extra shifts to help support military families in the area. She trusted Helen completely to watch over Katie, and the arrangement had worked well for the past 6 months. Katie was arranging small rocks around her cardboard fort when she noticed something strange in the sky. At first, she thought it was just an airplane, but this object moved differently. It was completely silent and seemed to hover in place above the neighborhood. The little girl stood up and shielded her eyes with her hand, trying to get a better look at the unusual craft. The object was dark gray and shaped like a smooth oval. It was about the size of a school bus, but it floated in the air without making any sound at all. Katie had never seen anything like it before. She wondered if it might be some kind of new military helicopter that her father would know about. High above the Morrison backyard, Captain Vextar of the Zephyrian Imperial Scout Division observed the human child through his ship's scanning equipment. The alien commander had been studying Earth for several weeks, learning about human behavior and weaknesses. His orders were simple: capture one human specimen for research purposes, preferably a young one whose mind would be easier to study and break. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 star systems over the past 3 centuries. They had studied and enslaved dozens of different species, always following the same pattern. First, they would observe a planet from a distance. Then they would capture a few specimens for research. Finally, they would decide whether the species was worth conquering or simply eliminating. Captain Vextar had already determined that humans were a primitive species with laughably weak technology. Their weapons were crude, their space travel was limited to their own moon, and their governments could barely cooperate with each other. The Empire's advanced technology could easily overwhelm any resistance Earth might offer. The alien captain had spent days observing different human settlements, looking for the perfect specimen to capture. Children were always preferred because their minds were more flexible and easier to study. Adult humans tended to be more resistant to the Empire's research methods, which made them less useful for understanding the species as a whole. Katie Morrison appeared to be an ideal choice. She was young, healthy, and isolated in her backyard with only an elderly human nearby. The child's father was away from the planet entirely, serving in some primitive military conflict on the other side of Earth. Her mother was working at a medical facility and would not return for several hours. The capture would be simple and clean. Inside the house, Helen Morrison glanced out the kitchen window to check on her granddaughter. She saw Katie standing in the middle of the yard, looking up at the sky with her hand over her eyes. Helen smiled and went back to stirring the soup she was preparing for dinner. Katie often stopped her play to watch airplanes or birds flying overhead. Captain Vextar activated his ship's tractor beam and began the abduction procedure. The invisible force reached down from his vessel and surrounded the human child. "Katie," suddenly found herself unable to move, as if the air around her had turned solid. She tried to call out, but her voice seemed to disappear into the evening air. Panic filled Katie's mind as she felt herself being lifted off the ground. Her feet left the soft grass of her backyard, and she began floating upward toward the strange craft hovering above her. She tried to scream for her grandmother, but the force holding her seemed to muffle all sound. Helen Morrison happened to look out the window at exactly the right moment. She saw her granddaughter floating 20 feet above the backyard, surrounded by a faint blue glow. The elderly woman dropped her wooden spoon and pressed her face against the glass, unable to believe what she was seeing. Katie looked down at her grandmother's horrified face in the kitchen window. She tried to reach toward the house, but her arms would not obey her commands. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she continued rising toward the alien spacecraft. Everything she loved was getting smaller and smaller below her. The alien vessel opened a hatch in its bottom section, and Katie disappeared inside. Captain Vextar sealed his ship and prepared to depart Earth's atmosphere. The entire abduction had taken less than 2 minutes. By his calculations, the primitive humans would not even realize what had happened until long after his ship reached safe distance from their planet. Helen Morrison stood frozen at her kitchen window, watching the gray craft rise silently into the darkening sky. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely among the stars. The elderly woman's hands shook as she reached for the telephone to call for help. She knew no one would believe her story, but she had to try. The backyard looked exactly as it had before, except for one thing. Katie's cardboard fort sat empty and abandoned, with small rocks still arranged carefully around its walls. The little girl who had been building it was now millions of miles away, beginning a journey that would change the course of human history forever. Helen Morrison called the police at exactly 7:30 that evening. Her voice shook as she tried to explain what she had seen in her backyard. The dispatcher on the other end of the line spoke slowly and carefully, as if talking to someone who might be confused or sick. The first police officer arrived 20 minutes later. Officer Danny Rogers had been a cop for 15 years, and he had heard many strange stories from worried family members. He walked through the Morrison backyard with Helen, looking at the abandoned cardboard fort and listening to her description of a floating gray craft. Officer Rogers wrote everything down in his notebook, but he did not really believe the elderly woman's story. He thought Helen might have seen a helicopter or a small plane in the distance. Perhaps Katie had simply run away or was hiding somewhere in the neighborhood. These things happened with children sometimes, but Helen Morrison kept insisting that she had watched her granddaughter float up into the sky and disappear into an alien ship. She begged Officer Rogers to contact the military or the government. She said someone needed to track the craft that had taken Katie away from Earth. At 9 o'clock that night, Dr. Lisa Morrison arrived home from the hospital. She found her mother-in-law sitting at the kitchen table with 2 police officers and a social worker. Helen's face was red from crying, and she immediately grabbed Lisa's hands when she walked through the door. Lisa Morrison listened to the incredible story with growing fear and disbelief. Her medical training told her that Helen might be suffering from some kind of mental episode, but her mother's instincts told her that Katie was really gone. The house felt empty without her daughter's laughter echoing through the rooms. The police searched the entire neighborhood that night. They knocked on every door and looked in every garage, basement, and shed. They brought search dogs to follow Katie's scent, but the trail ended in the middle of the backyard where Helen said the craft had hovered. By midnight, the local police had contacted the FBI. Special Agent Carol Evans arrived from the Denver field office to interview Helen Morrison again. Agent Evans had dealt with many missing children cases, and she knew that the first 24 hours were critical for finding them alive. Agent Evans was patient and professional as she listened to Helen's story for the 3rd time that night. She took detailed notes and asked specific questions about the timing, the appearance of the craft, and exactly what Helen had observed. Something about the old woman's story bothered her, but she could not figure out what it was. At 3 in the morning, Agent Evans received a phone call that changed everything. The call came from NORAD, the military command center that tracked objects in space around Earth. A technician named Kevin Walsh had been reviewing satellite data from earlier that evening when he discovered something impossible. The satellites had recorded an energy signature unlike anything in their databases. The readings showed a craft moving at incredible speed, first descending toward Denver and then accelerating away from Earth at velocities that no human technology could achieve. The energy pattern was completely unknown to Earth science. Agent Evans immediately contacted her supervisors in Washington. Within an hour, she was talking to officials from NASA, the Pentagon, and the National Security Council. Helen Morrison's impossible story was beginning to look like the truth. By dawn, military helicopters were circling the Morrison house. Scientists from government laboratories arrived with equipment to scan the backyard for any traces of unusual energy or radiation. They found exactly what they were looking for. Dr. Richard Hayes from Los Alamos National Laboratory detected residual energy patterns in the soil where Katie had been standing. The readings matched the satellite data perfectly. Something with incredibly advanced technology had indeed hovered over the Morrison backyard and then departed Earth's atmosphere. The news reached Colonel Jake Morrison at his base in Syria at noon local time. His commanding officer, General Paul Miller, called him into a secure briefing room and told him that his daughter had been abducted by what appeared to be an alien spacecraft. Jake Morrison sat in stunned silence as General Miller explained the situation. The Marine colonel had faced combat in 3 different countries, but nothing had prepared him for this news. His little girl, his precious Katie, had been taken by creatures from another world. Within 6 hours, Colonel Morrison was on a military transport plane heading back to the United States. The entire flight crew had been briefed on the classified nature of his emergency return. Jake spent the long journey staring out the window at the stars, wondering which one might hold his daughter. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Richard Hayes convened an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. The president had been awakened at 4 a.m. with news that would change human history forever. Earth had made contact with an alien species, and that contact had begun with an act of war. Dr. Amanda Price, the head of NASA's Advanced Research Division, presented information that shocked everyone in the room. For the past 15 years, her team had been secretly working on faster-than-light travel technology. The project was based on mysterious debris found in the Sahara Desert in 2009, debris that scientists had never been able to fully understand. Now the debris made perfect sense. It was alien technology, probably from a crashed spacecraft that had visited Earth decades earlier. Dr. Price's team had reverse-engineered enough of the technology to build experimental engines that could theoretically travel faster than light. President Hayes asked the question that everyone was thinking: could these experimental engines be used to rescue Katie Morrison? Dr. Price admitted that the technology was still untested and dangerous, but it might be humanity's only hope of reaching the stars. General Marcus Webb, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented a different perspective. He argued that Katie's abduction was an act of war against the entire human species. If aliens thought they could take human children without consequences, they needed to learn otherwise. The meeting lasted until dawn. By the time the sun rose over Washington, the president had made a decision that would echo through history. The United States would share its secret faster-than-light technology with every nation on Earth. Humanity would unite under one military command with one goal: bringing Katie Morrison home and making sure this never happened again. The age of human space exploration was about to begin, not with a spirit of peaceful discovery, but with the fury of parents whose child had been stolen. The aliens who had taken Katie Morrison had no idea what they had just awakened. 6 months after Katie Morrison disappeared into the night sky, Earth launched its first fleet of starships. The construction had happened faster than anyone thought possible. Every country on the planet had contributed money, materials, and their best scientists to build 12 ships capable of traveling faster than light. The flagship was called the UES Retribution. Admiral Patricia Stone commanded the massive vessel from her bridge high above Earth's atmosphere. Beside her stood Colonel Jake Morrison, now serving as the fleet's strategic advisor and leader of all rescue operations. Jake had not slept well since his daughter's abduction, and his eyes showed the strain of 6 months spent planning this moment. The other 11 ships formed a protective formation around the Retribution. Each vessel carried the most advanced weapons that human science could create. The ships also held 3,000 of Earth's best soldiers, all volunteers who had asked to join the mission to rescue Katie Morrison and strike back at her kidnappers. Dr. Amanda Price had worked day and night to perfect the faster-than-light engines. The technology was still dangerous and unpredictable, but it was humanity's only way to reach the stars. Each ship carried enough fuel for a one-way journey, because no one knew if they would ever make it home. The fleet's first target was a Zephyrian mining colony on the edge of their empire's territory. Intelligence gathered from radio signals and energy signatures suggested this was where the aliens processed materials from conquered worlds. More importantly, it might hold clues about where they had taken Katie and other human prisoners. Admiral Stone gave the order to jump to faster-than-light speed at exactly noon on a sunny Tuesday. The 12 ships disappeared from Earth's orbit in a flash of blue light, leaving behind the only world humanity had ever known. The journey to the alien colony would take 3 days at maximum speed. During the long journey through space, Colonel Morrison briefed his rescue teams on what they might find. The soldiers came from every branch of the military and every country on Earth. American Marines served alongside British commandos, Russian special forces, and Japanese naval infantry. They all shared one common goal: bringing human children safely home. Captain Ryan Tucker led the first assault team. The former Navy SEAL had volunteered for the mission after learning that the aliens had been abducting humans for much longer than anyone realized. Intelligence suggested that Katie Morrison was not the first child taken, just the first one whose disappearance had been witnessed and reported. The alien mining colony appeared on their screens after 3 days of travel. The Zephyrian facility was built on a barren moon orbiting a distant star. Huge machines dug precious metals from the moon's surface while alien workers supervised the automated equipment. The colony had minimal defenses because the Zephyrians had never faced an attack from another species. Admiral Stone positioned her fleet in orbit around the moon and sent a simple message to the alien colony: return all human prisoners immediately, or face total destruction. The response came back in broken English, transmitted through primitive radio equipment. The alien commander claimed to know nothing about human prisoners and demanded that the Earth ships leave Zephyrian territory at once. Colonel Morrison had expected this response. He activated the fleet's most powerful scanners and began searching for any sign of human life on the mining colony. The sophisticated equipment could detect human DNA patterns and brain activity from orbit. After 20 minutes of scanning, they found what they were looking for. 3 human adults were being held in the colony's research facility. The scanner readings showed they were alive but unconscious, probably sedated for ongoing experiments. Colonel Morrison felt his rage building as he realized that Katie might be suffering the same fate somewhere else in the galaxy. The attack began at dawn on the alien moon. Human dropships descended through the thin atmosphere while the main fleet provided covering fire from orbit. The Zephyrian defenders had never seen anything like human military tactics. Where other species fought in organized formations, humans seemed to attack from everywhere at once. Captain Tucker's assault team landed directly on top of the research facility. The soldiers moved through the alien corridors with deadly efficiency, using breaching charges and combat techniques that the Zephyrians could not understand or counter. The aliens were used to fighting civilized species that followed predictable patterns of warfare. The human soldiers fought with a fury that terrified their alien enemies. Each warrior carried pictures of Katie Morrison and other missing children. They had traveled across the galaxy not for conquest or glory, but to rescue innocents and punish those who had harmed them. This kind of motivation was completely foreign to the Zephyrian military mind. The research facility fell in less than 4 hours. Captain Tucker found the 3 human prisoners in underground laboratories, suspended in tanks filled with strange liquid. The rescued humans were weak and confused, but they were alive. They had been taken from remote areas of Earth over the past 2 years, captured during camping trips and hiking expeditions, where their disappearances would not be immediately noticed. One of the rescued prisoners was Dr. Kevin Walsh, a geologist who had vanished during a research expedition in Alaska. Another was Maria Santos, a park ranger who had disappeared while working alone in a national forest. The third was Bobby Chen, a college student who had been camping with friends when the aliens took him. The prisoners told Colonel Morrison everything they knew about their captivity. The Zephyrians had been studying human biology and psychology, trying to understand what made Earth's people different from other species they had conquered. The aliens seemed puzzled by human emotional responses and their refusal to accept defeat even in hopeless situations. Most importantly, the rescued prisoners confirmed that other humans were being held at different locations throughout the Zephyrian Empire. Katie Morrison was probably alive somewhere in alien space along with dozens of other abducted people. The mining colony had been just one small piece of a much larger operation. Before destroying the mining facility, human soldiers downloaded every piece of data from the alien computers. The information included star charts, communication logs, and detailed records of other Zephyrian installations. Dr. Ellen Foster, the fleet's intelligence officer, spent hours analyzing the captured data. The information revealed the full scope of the Zephyrian Empire's crimes. They had been abducting members of various species for centuries, conducting experiments that would be considered torture by any civilized standard. Entire civilizations had been enslaved or eliminated to feed the Empire's hunger for expansion and knowledge. But the data also revealed something that would change the course of the war. The Zephyrians had never encountered a species like humans before. Their weapons and tactics were designed to fight civilizations that surrendered when faced with superior technology. They had no experience dealing with a species that would cross the galaxy to rescue a single child. Admiral Stone ordered the complete destruction of the mining colony. The 12 human ships fired their weapons until nothing remained of the alien facility except glowing debris. It was humanity's first victory in their war against the Zephyrian Empire, but Colonel Morrison knew it was only the beginning. The rescued prisoners were placed in medical care aboard the Retribution, while the fleet prepared for their next target. The alien data had revealed the location of a major research facility, where human specimens were being held for advanced experimentation. Katie Morrison might be there, along with other children who had been taken from Earth. As the human fleet jumped back into faster-than-light travel, word of their victory spread across the galaxy through Zephyrian communication networks. For the first time in 3 centuries, the mighty Zephyrian Empire had suffered a military defeat. The species they had dismissed as primitive had just destroyed one of their colonies and rescued prisoners that were thought to be lost forever. The hunt for Katie Morrison continued, but now the aliens knew they were being hunted in return. The human fleet reached the Zephyrian research facility after 2 weeks of traveling through alien space. The massive station orbited a red star in the heart of the Empire's territory. It was 10 times larger than the mining colony they had destroyed, with weapons and shields that could defend against entire fleets. Admiral Stone studied the alien fortress through her ship's powerful telescopes. The research station was shaped like a giant wheel, slowly spinning in the darkness of space. Hundreds of small ships moved around it like insects, carrying supplies and prisoners from across the galaxy. This was where the Empire conducted its most secret experiments on captured species. Colonel Morrison stood beside the Admiral, staring at the place where his daughter might be imprisoned. The intelligence data from the mining colony had confirmed that human prisoners were being held at this facility. Katie Morrison's name had appeared on several transport logs, along with dozens of other abducted humans. The rescue mission would be far more dangerous than their first attack. The research station had powerful weapons and thousands of alien soldiers protecting it. But the human fleet had learned important lessons from their victory at the mining colony. They now understood how the Zephyrians fought, and more importantly, how they did not expect to be fought against. Captain Alex Grant led the Special Forces team that would assault the station directly. The former Army Ranger had studied every piece of intelligence about the facility's layout and defenses. His team of 40 soldiers represented the best fighters from every military on Earth. They had trained together for months, preparing for this exact mission. The attack began with a massive bombardment from the human fleet. All 12 ships opened fire at once, overwhelming the station's defensive shields with pure firepower. The Zephyrian commanders had never faced such an aggressive assault. Most species tried to negotiate or surrender when confronted with superior defenses. While the main fleet kept the alien defenders busy, Captain Grant's team approached the research station in small stealth ships. They landed in the facility's docking bay and immediately began fighting their way toward the prison sections. The alien guards were completely unprepared for human combat tactics. The human soldiers moved through the station's corridors like a devastating storm. They used explosives, smoke grenades, and close-quarters combat techniques that left the Zephyrian defenders confused and terrified. The aliens had trained to fight other civilized species that followed predictable rules of engagement. Humans followed no such rules when their children were in danger. Captain Grant found the first group of human prisoners in a laboratory deep inside the station. 23 adults and children were being held in cells that looked more like cages. They had been taken from Earth over the past 3 years, captured during what the aliens called specimen collection operations. All of them were alive, but many showed signs of the terrible experiments that had been performed on them. But Katie Morrison was not among this first group of prisoners. Captain Grant continued deeper into the research facility, following the station's layout maps that his team had memorized. The central laboratory section was where the aliens conducted their most important experiments. If Katie was anywhere, she would be there. The human soldiers fought past wave after wave of alien defenders. The Zephyrian guards could not understand why these creatures fought with such fury and determination. In their experience, most species became discouraged when faced with heavy resistance. Humans seemed to fight harder when the odds were against them. Captain Grant finally reached the central laboratory after 4 hours of continuous combat. He blasted through the heavily armored door with explosive charges and led his team into the facility's most secure section. What they found inside changed everything they thought they knew about the war. Katie Morrison was strapped to an examination table in the center of the laboratory. Alien scientists had attached strange devices to her head and arms, monitoring her brain activity while they conducted their experiments. But the 10-year-old girl was not broken or defeated. Her eyes still blazed with the same defiance that had carried her through 8 months of captivity. When Katie saw the human soldiers enter the laboratory, she did not cry or beg for help. Instead, she immediately began telling them about the other prisoners who needed rescue. She had somehow learned the alien language during her imprisonment and had been communicating with captured beings from other species throughout the research station. Captain Grant and his team quickly freed Katie from the examination table while fighting off the alien scientists and guards. The little girl was weak from months of experiments, but she insisted on helping the soldiers find the other prison sections. She had memorized the layout of the entire facility and knew where every group of prisoners was being held. As they moved through the station, Katie told the human soldiers about what she had discovered during her captivity. The Zephyrian Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for hundreds of years, conquering and enslaving any species they encountered. They had destroyed entire civilizations and turned the survivors into laboratory specimens. But Katie had done something that no other prisoner had ever accomplished. She had organized the captives from different species into a resistance movement inside the research facility. The small girl had become a leader among beings who had given up all hope of ever being free. The rescued prisoners told Captain Grant and his team a story that shocked them. Other species throughout the galaxy had simply accepted their fate when the Zephyrians conquered them. They had surrendered their children and submitted to slavery because they believed resistance was hopeless. No species had ever fought back against the Empire with the fury that humans displayed. Dr. Rachel Martinez, the fleet's intelligence officer, analyzed the information that Katie and the other prisoners provided. The data revealed something incredible about humanity's place in the galaxy. Most intelligent species had evolved to be peaceful and cooperative. They had developed space travel through scientific cooperation and diplomatic contact with other civilizations. Humans were completely different. They had reached the stars while still retaining their predatory instincts and aggressive nature. Other species saw this as primitive and barbaric, but it made humans uniquely suited for warfare against the Zephyrian Empire. Every human was potentially a soldier, and every human family was willing to fight to protect their children. The implications were staggering. The galaxy was full of advanced civilizations that had been conquered by the Zephyrians because they did not know how to fight effectively. They had surrendered rather than risk total destruction. Humans had chosen total war over the loss of a single child, and that choice had revealed their true nature. Katie Morrison had not just survived her captivity. She had studied her captors and learned their weaknesses. She told Captain Grant that the Zephyrians were terrified of chaos and unpredictability. Their entire military doctrine was based on fighting organized, civilized opponents. They had no effective response to the wild, emotional fighting style that humans brought to battle. The rescue operation lasted 12 hours. Human soldiers fought through every section of the research station, freeing prisoners from dozens of different species. Many of the rescued beings had been captives for years, or even decades. They looked at their human rescuers with amazement, unable to believe that any species would cross the galaxy to save strangers. As the human fleet prepared to leave the destroyed research station, Admiral Stone received a communication from the Zephyrian High Command. The alien leaders wanted to negotiate a peace treaty. They offered to return all human prisoners in exchange for Earth agreeing to stay within their own solar system. Colonel Morrison looked at his daughter, who was finally safe in his arms after 8 months of separation. Katie was thin and weak, but her spirit had not been broken. She looked up at her father with the same bright eyes he remembered from their backyard in Denver. But now those eyes held knowledge of the galaxy and its dangers that no child should ever have to possess. The Colonel's answer to the alien peace offer was simple. There would be no negotiation. The Zephyrian Empire had declared war on humanity when they took his daughter. Now they would face the consequences of that decision. The rescue of Katie Morrison was just the beginning of humanity's response to 3 centuries of galactic tyranny. The human fleet set course for the Zephyrian capital world, carrying with them the rescued prisoners and the knowledge that would bring down an empire. Katie Morrison was going home, but her ordeal had awakened something in humanity that would change the galaxy forever. Katie Morrison's return to Earth created celebrations that lasted for weeks. Every major city on the planet held parades and festivals to welcome home the brave little girl who had survived 8 months of alien captivity. But while the world celebrated, the governments of Earth were planning something much darker. President Richard Hayes addressed the United Nations with Katie sitting beside him on the stage. The 10-year-old girl had insisted on speaking to the world leaders herself. In her small, clear voice, she told them about the thousands of innocent beings from dozens of species who were still trapped in Zephyrian prison camps across the galaxy. Katie described the aliens she had met during her captivity. There were children from peaceful worlds who had been taken from their families years ago. There were scientists and artists who had been captured for experiments. There were entire populations of species that had been enslaved or killed by the Zephyrian Empire over the past 3 centuries. The world leaders listened in stunned silence as this young human child explained the true scope of galactic history. The Zephyrian Empire had built their civilization on the suffering of others. They had committed genocide against dozens of species and turned space exploration into a tool of conquest and oppression. President Hayes announced humanity's decision to the assembled delegates. Earth would not accept a peace treaty with the Zephyrian Empire. There would be no negotiation or compromise. The aliens had targeted a human child, and humanity would respond with the complete elimination of their ability to harm anyone ever again. General Marcus Webb presented the military plan to destroy the Zephyrian Empire. Earth's shipyards had been working around the clock since Katie's rescue. The original fleet of 12 ships had grown to over 1,000 vessels, each one armed with weapons designed specifically to fight alien technology. Every nation on Earth had contributed everything they could to the war effort. Scientists from around the world had worked together to improve human weapons and defenses. Factory workers had volunteered for extra shifts to build more ships and equipment. Millions of people had joined the military, all wanting to help finish what the aliens had started. The human fleet that departed Earth for the final battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 1,000 starships carrying 200,000 soldiers, all united by their anger at what had been done to Katie Morrison and countless other innocent beings throughout the galaxy. Admiral Stone commanded the massive fleet from her flagship, now renamed the UES Katie Morrison in honor of the brave girl who had started this war. Colonel Morrison served as her second-in-command, leading the ground forces that would finish the job their rescue mission had begun. The journey to the Zephyrian capital world took 3 weeks. During the long voyage, the rescued alien prisoners worked with human intelligence officers to plan the final assault. They provided detailed information about the Empire's military bases, government centers, and leadership structure. Captain Nicole Davis commanded the assault on the Zephyrian homeworld. The former Air Force pilot had volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission. Her fleet of 300 ships would attack the planet's orbital defenses, while the main force dealt with the Empire's remaining military fleet. The Zephyrian capital was a beautiful world covered in crystal cities and floating palaces. For 3 centuries, the Empire's leaders had lived in luxury built on the suffering of conquered species. They had never imagined that their victims might someday come seeking justice. The battle for the Zephyrian homeworld lasted 3 days. The alien defenders fought desperately, but they could not match the fury and determination of the human attack. Earth soldiers had crossed the galaxy with one purpose: to ensure that no other child would ever suffer as Katie Morrison had suffered. Human ground forces landed in the capital city and fought their way to the Imperial Palace. The Zephyrian rulers tried to surrender, offering to give up their conquered territories and free all their prisoners. But surrender was not enough. The Empire had committed too many crimes against too many innocent beings. General Webb accepted the surrender of the Zephyrian military, but he made it clear that accepting surrender was not the same as offering mercy. The Empire's ability to wage war would be completely destroyed. Their government would be dissolved. Their territory would be given to the species they had oppressed. The systematic destruction of the Zephyrian Empire took 6 months. Human forces captured every military base, every weapons factory, and every government installation. They freed millions of enslaved beings from prison camps and labor colonies throughout the Empire's former territory. Katie Morrison traveled with the fleet during this final phase of the war. The 11-year-old girl had become a symbol of hope for the liberated species. Wherever human ships appeared, word spread that the small human child who had organized prisoner resistance was helping to bring freedom to the galaxy. The Zephyrian species was not eliminated, but their empire was completely destroyed. The former rulers were placed on trial for their crimes against galactic civilization. Most were sentenced to life imprisonment on isolated worlds where they could never again harm innocent beings. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of her flagship as the last Zephyrian military installation was destroyed. Beside her, Katie Morrison watched through the viewports as explosions lit up the darkness of space. The girl who had been taken as a specimen had become the catalyst for the liberation of dozens of worlds. Earth established the Terran Protectorate to govern the territories that had been freed from Zephyrian rule. The new government's primary mission was to ensure that no species would ever again suffer under the kind of tyranny the Empire had represented. Human fleets would patrol the galaxy, protecting the innocent and punishing those who preyed upon the weak. The rescued species looked at humanity with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Earth's military had accomplished something that seemed impossible: the complete destruction of a galactic empire that had terrorized civilized space for centuries. But humans had done it not for conquest or glory, but to protect children and other innocent beings. Katie Morrison returned to her house in Denver, but she was no longer just a little girl who played in her backyard. She had become the child whose kidnapping had introduced humanity to the galaxy, and whose rescue had established Earth as the guardian of the innocent across the stars. The backyard where Katie had been taken was now a memorial to all the children who had suffered under alien oppression. Visitors from around the world came to see the place where the Galactic War had begun. A simple placard marked the spot where the Zephyrian ship had hovered on that March evening. Katie often stood in that same spot, looking up at the stars that were no longer unknown territory. They were humanity's new frontier, protected by the promise that no child would ever again suffer as she had suffered. The playground where she had once built cardboard forts was now the symbolic center of human space exploration. The galaxy learned a simple but powerful truth from the destruction of the Zephyrian Empire. Humans were not just another species to be conquered or studied. They were the species that would declare total war over a single child and follow through with the complete elimination of anyone who threatened innocence. Earth's message to the galaxy was clear and unmistakable. Harm a human child and face total extermination. Harm any child of any species, and humanity would come for you with the full fury of a species that valued the protection of innocence above their own safety. The age of human expansion into the galaxy had begun, and it started with one family's refusal to accept the unacceptable. Katie Morrison had come home, and she had brought freedom to the stars with her.